All right, everybody. Go ahead and jump right in here. I do apologize today. Today's topic and share the wealth is a little less developed and a little less in demo, a little bit more slideware. So we always enjoy that, right? So first and foremost, welcome everybody. I'm going to take us through the road of ServiceNow Security Operations, introducing it to you guys at a very high level. And then throughout the share the wealth, so that we have scheduled every Friday in January, we're going to dive in and actually work through some of the suite operations and suite tools that we can use. And I do mean that as sweet and sweet. All right. So if you haven't already noticed, on every Friday on your agenda, you do have a share of the wealth. That is a SecOps mini series. We're going to cover today, really give you the view of what it is and why it's there, and what you're going to hear the customer problem statements and how ServiceNow looks to solve that. From there, we're going to take a deep dive into two of the main product lines within ServiceNow Security Operations suites throughout the next sessions. And excitingly enough, we're actually going to see a little bit of the world of Aric's home environment and work through some security and vulnerability scenarios in Aric's home lab. And yes, I do have some actual very critical vulnerabilities that we can work through and fix. And I promise you they are real. It's a little bit exciting, or as at least exciting as security can be. All right. So in order to understand why ServiceNow's Security Operations Suite, we have to take a step back and we have to talk about security operations agnostically. So the first thing that I'll mention, right, is this is knowing is half the battle. You're absolutely right. Appreciate that. So you're going to hear the term SecOps as an abbreviation. We've all seen kind of industry terms, right? Buzzwords out there. We've seen SecOps, or security operations. We've seen DevSecOps. We've seen DevOps. We've seen all these little, whatever you want to call it, ops. Throw cloud and cloud ops out there as well. So what's important to understand is that within the idea of security operations, or SecOps, this was born from some folks out there in the security world who saw what DevOps was doing, where we were really looking to bridge the gap between the development world and the daily operational world, and said, hey, this looks like a great thing for security operations. So why don't we start to leverage some of the tools that are out there? And why don't we build these some sort of an orchestration or a correlation platform that then lets us bridge all of this and make things better for the security world? So the key thing to hone in on, even though we'll talk about it in the world of ServiceNow, and there is a product or a platform that goes with this, the real thing to realize is what's underneath that. Security operations really drives the collaboration of, or seeks to drive the collaboration of, right? The security world, where your security world from the high to the low really focuses on how do we catch, how do we prevent, how do we detect, and it really starts to lose focus. It's very easy as a security practitioner to lose focus of the other side of the house. Okay, we found an issue. Now we're tasking the operative people, the server owner, asset owner, etc., tasking them with going and fixing it, but we've lost sight of how they're doing that. So we look to bridge that gap and bring that whole world in. We also look at the one statement that you'll see here on this slide, right? Very important statement. The culture, right? The key thing is security operations is more than a platform, a process, it's a culture. And with a lot of organizations, even in 2020, 2021, 2022, even in the world that we see here and know of all the attacks and data breaches, even for those organizations, it is a culture change, and it's a hard change for a lot of people to make. Your security people are security. They don't want to give that up. Your operations people do what they do best, and they don't want to be told what to do. So anytime we walk into an organization talking about security operations, we are seeking to do much more than implement a tool and a process. We're seeking to help change culture. By doing so, we have made the whole business now aware, and we've made the problem the whole business's problem. And to that end, why? So AT&T and Ponemon put out a cost of data breach report for 2021 already. This was published end of year, kind of in the early December timeline. And what this really points to is just some interestingly alarming numbers. We would like to think, as many times as we have heard all of these breaches in the news, we've heard all of these, hey, it can be fixed, we can make it better. We would like to think that we would start to see an improvement over time. And then you factor in the pandemic and the move to remote. We've been in that long enough that you would think that organizations would have been able to shift and cover their security needs for remote workforce. They haven't. And that's really a big deal, right? 2021 saw a total cost of breaches increase 10% over 2021, and we can imagine over time there as well. One chart that I did not grab out of this report that was quite interesting is we actually saw a decrease in cost in 2019, right before pandemic. So we think and feel like maybe we were headed on a little bit of a trend, but as anything else in the operations and security world, things change quickly. Right along with that, another interesting stat of why we need a focus on security operations, the full suite, is that 38% of breach cost overall was in lost business. So there's your financial driver right there. Yeah, we can look at this chart and we can see, that another 29% was cost of detecting and escalating the response of those. We can see that there's a significant cleanup or post-breach response cost to this as well. But the largest driving cost was in the loss of business. So obviously, losing business is never a good thing for an organization. And if a huge, average of cost over that, we want to look to tighten that up. We also saw in 2021, 44% of 2021 breaches did actually include a breach of customer identifying information. PII being that of things like name, address, phone number, location data, consumer purchase data, all the way down to actual financial data like bank account, credit card, identity theft related data. And not only did 44% of those breaches contain that type of information, but there was able to be an average number of costs per each record. So my data out there in the consumer breach world has an average record cost across the entire industry at $180 per type of data. My credit card number is worth $180 to somebody. My social security number is worth another $180. And if we think about that for a moment, the cost of my data now skyrockets. Obviously, that's a high target asset. Somebody is really wanting that information. And last but certainly not least, in terms of the bad, we saw an increase in time of identification and resolution of these breaches. So what I wasn't able to detail out is there's actually a life cycle to each of these breaches. We have the time in which it took to detect that it was occurring. We have the time to identify how it's occurring, where it's occurring. We have the time to respond to that, to shut it down, etc. And we'll see that as we get into some of the product offerings within ServiceNow, that these have a phase to them. But if we take all of those phases and we take a look, 2019, we saw an average from point of detection or point of occurrence to point of fixing and stopping the breach. This is not the total time because we have post-breach issues. We have things like reporting the breach. If you're in a regulated industry, reporting out to investor stack. We have things like reporting out to healthcare organizations. That continues on even beyond this 200 plus a day cycle. The simple fact here is it's taking longer. Where we should be seeing the data transformation, the orchestration life cycles, improving this, we're not. We went from 279 days to the point of containing and stopping the breach to 287 days in 21. And I'm sure we can all surmise some of the reasons: pandemic, remote workforce, etc. An interesting little stat that also gives us the why of security operations. Oops. Drop back here. Might be a little bit hard to see. It's hard to scale some of these charts and images. But if we look at this chart in the lower right-hand corner as well, we can see a time period versus cost to high, low, and average regulated industries. And what we see across the board is regulation equals increased attention in data, healthcare, FinOps, some of those types of industries that have a higher level of regulation. They're regulated for a reason, and the bad actors want that data as well. So your high and low regulation industries see a very high burden of cost right at the beginning of that breach. 0 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, and 6 to 9 months. So if we talk about that first 9 months of breach life cycle, a very large burden of cost is seen in that. And then we start to see an increase also the longer this goes. So we can very quickly surmise and see time. The sooner we can identify and fix, the sooner we can, if breach occurs, the sooner we can eliminate our cost or reduce. Cool. So I gave you the bad news. Everything is getting worse. We're seeing more breach. We're seeing higher cost of breach, higher complexity of breach. How do we look? What were some of the things that industries across the board did that helped us reduce those? Zero trust, a big buzzword. A lot that we could talk about in what zero trust really is. It's a very security-minded, trust no one, require multi-factor, some of those architectural things. It's all about 1.6 million reduction in average life cost of a breach. But the one big number that is really where and why we talk about security operations as a process and as a platform in ServiceNow is this one right here. Adding AI and automation controls reduced costs for industries that had well-built automation controls by 80% or more, average of 80%. This is security automation. This is ServiceNow. And interestingly enough, when we start, after we've reviewed the why and we start to see what ServiceNow offers, we'll see that one of the things that ServiceNow helps us do is frame our process around incident response and vulnerability remediation. So AT&T and Ponemon found, if we take a look, for those organizations out there that have an incident response plan and tested it, we can see those that have this all the way over here on the right, obviously our actual highest cost in breach cost. Neither these organizations in this realm had no incident response team, had no plan, and had not tested the plan. Best of scenario here. And if we take a look, 19, 20, and 21, we see with no plan, our costs are rising. With plans, our costs are decreasing as we make those processes more efficient. So we can see the bad and we can see the good. Having a plan, knowing what's going on in your environment, and having a plan for being able to reduce this life cycle helps us reduce costs significantly and helps us reduce our complexity significantly. So why is this a problem? I know PowerPoint animations are so 1990s, but I have to. We can see as that graphic builds, and this is a very, very, very small slice of the tool set. There are many tools. There still, even today, are a ton of tools out there that do security, and they all do something well. Tools like Splunk, Tanium, firewalls that are out there, Checkpoint Firewall, Carbon Black. They all do one slice of the security stack very well. Taken point, right? Carbon Black is a great endpoint detection tool. It sits on all of our mobile devices, laptops, etc., and it reports back with bad things that happen to the laptop. but it doesn't tell us about the rest of the infrastructure. So that's where things like Palo Alto, Checkpoint, Cisco, et cetera, come in. But the complexity of this, each of these are specialized. Each of these have their own method way of alerting, prioritizing, and causing action. It's a lot of noise. And because each of these are very specialized, each of these tend to target towards the security teams, not those that fix stuff. And I can tell you from living in that world as an operations specialist, I didn't like when a security person came to me and told me something I did was wrong. I didn't like it at all. And as we add this stack, each of these does something well, but it does its own little thing in its own little silo. We tend to add a complexity of time. And again, as we saw, time of resolution is increasing, and that's not good. And then we can also get the sense that this starts to leave out our operations stack. Again, those that fix it. So I'm a security specialist and I'm implementing Carbon Black in our environment. Carbon Black, alerts that there's a virus on a laptop or a potential bad link that has been introduced or clicked. Where does that alert go? 9 times out of 10 in an organization, that's going to the person that deployed the tool, or the group, or the group or business unit that's responsible for that tool. And in a budget and finance world, that's security. So we've already just siloed our environment. So a lot of noise. ServiceNow now comes in, starts to organize, categorize, group, and ultimately integrate all of these different tools into the ServiceNow stack, allowing us to make action quickly on it. We're all ServiceNow. We all understand the benefits of ServiceNow. So I don't necessarily have to go into all the benefits of workflows, automations, CMDB integration, which is very key to the SecOps platform. But we very quickly see that what does this let us do? Every arrow in here is pointing to ServiceNow. We take all of that noise, we funnel it into the business intelligence tool factor of ServiceNow, and we do stuff with it. All right, so we've arrived. We've talked about security operations, bridging the gap between the security world and the operations world. We've talked about the fact that all of these organizations out there are struggling with a lot of noise and a lot of tools. And each tool does something very well, but it leaves the rest out. So now let's talk about ServiceNow. It's what we're all here for anyways. So ServiceNow stack, if we've seen the newer, latest, greatest way of marketing the platform, right? We're a platform of platforms. And across that, from a marketing perspective, ServiceNow has started to group these into 4 main workflow segments of the platform: IT employee, customer, and creator. Security operations falls within the IT workflow world and offers these particular tools. Graphic here intentionally designed by what we tend to see the most. So the 3 main pieces: SIR, security incident response, vulnerability response, and then the up and coming of configuration compliance. All of these interact with each other and with the platform as a whole in a variety of ways. We'll see that on our journey this month. But the key to hone in on is that these are all under this premise or industry concept of SOAR. SOAR is a term that, if we look back at all the slideware we've gone through so far, and we've talked about all of the complexity, all of the noise, and yet all of the benefit of orchestration and automation. That's exactly what the SOAR premise or concept is: security automation, orchestration, and response. Now, I want to take a moment and hone in on these terms. We all know what security is, but automation, orchestration, and response in the security world is not the technical of it. Yes, we can leverage tools and platform to automate. Yes, we can leverage tools and processes to orchestrate. However, in the security world, as Stanley has very nicely mentioned in our chat, right? Knowing is half of the battle. SOAR seeks to provide knowledge. That the premise here is providing a place, not many places, but a single place to go and look, providing the information right out front to me and letting me or a process resolve and remediate quicker. So within our security stack, our operations suite stack, welcome to Mouseware 101 there. Within our stack, the three main products that are offered or tend to be interacted with: incident response, vulnerability response, and configuration compliance. And then we have the way we do it. We have the ability to leverage event management, a bridge over to the ITOM stack, utilizing the event management engine that's underneath all of this to help us correlate the noise if needed. We have the ability to leverage solution management within vulnerability to help us know how to fix quicker. And then we have the idea of threat intelligence, where we can bring in preventative knowledge and data feeds. All of this is built on a stack of none of this is any good if we can't bring the data in and if we can't visualize it. So we also have some excellent content packs built for performance analytics, as well as some pre-built integration bundles throughout some strategic partnerships. All right. So we talked about here the platform, the product, and the parts of the platform. All of those are what seek to utilize security operations within ServiceNow to make security everybody's problem. So the next few slides are intense. They're intense because that's what security is. What we can start to see within each theme of our product, driven right into our center line here, security incident, vulnerability, and configuration compliance, is a very wide-reaching interaction. We know that ServiceNow has interaction across many points or business units within the organization, right? We can talk about configuration, we can talk about asset, we can talk about incident or the ITSM stack, et cetera. All of that interacted with here. But our key and core concept is that we allow security, vulnerability to respect all of those others, interact with all of those others, complement all of those others, so that we get a quicker response. And you'll notice here, right? All of our slideware so far, all of the what is SecOps, why is it, what is cost, is all driven around the fact that there could be a breach. So our security operations stack centers around security incident and incident response, where all of these others feed that data. And I think that's key to understanding what is security operations in ServiceNow. Yes, we can sell and deploy vulnerability response by itself. Yes, we can sell and deploy configuration compliance by itself or security incident by itself. But truly, when we go back and we look at all of those cost and reduction of cost, if we don't have the stack, or at least a view and roadmap of the stack as a whole, we're going to struggle to show a customer and show a business where they're really saving money. And I absolutely promise you, over the next 3 sessions, we will get into each of these and we will see what these really do for us. So we take a look at each of these parts. We start to talk about, again, honing really in on security incident response, right? And we start to see that we leverage process. What is a security incident? A security incident is what we hear in the world as a breach. However, a security incident does not actually have to have been a breach. I lost my password. I think my password was compromised. We know it never happens. We never find any users in the operations world that have their password tucked under a keyboard. My data has been compromised. It can be all of those automated tool sets, Splunk, CrowdStrike, we can talk about Carbon Black, that do all of the detection. All of those are incidents. The mere fact that we see as a maybe healthcare organization, we're seeing a targeted attack, whether it breaches or not, on a specific healthcare application we may have is an incident. So we have an opportunity here to leverage the other parts of our platform that we talk about: risk management, vulnerability, threat, etc., to determine the process of making that a not breach incident. In the event that it does breach, we also have playbooks that we can work on and processes that we build, much like you will see in your standard incident world, to move these through quickly and efficiently. So I think the key here, and the reason why we talk about security incident first, is because that's where our cost really comes in. That is our threat to our organization. That is what we try to avoid, but it's also what we want to know about. No organization is immune, not even your home network. Not to raise alarms and not to make everybody run and put their tinfoil hats on. But the fact of the matter is, I can sit here and scan my own or have these types of tools here at home and see port scans, attempts to connect, attempts for remote execution of code, even on my own personal home internet link with low bandwidth. Nobody is immune to that attack. So it is important to provide visibility, and it's important to provide planning and response. And we'll notice here the blowout of security incident. The real driving factor is the response. Once we have identified through the integration processes, how are we responding? We're going to be able to take feeds and tell you, based on these feeds, how many other incidents in our environment have we seen? This IP address, this port scan, this targeted asset. We can see the external of that as well. For healthcare, we can subscribe to healthcare data feeds that now tell us how many other healthcare organizations. Is this us or is this healthcare as a whole? And therefore, how do we respond? We can also feed vulnerability response into this, where now when we talk about security incident, we talk about something happening actively against or in our environment. Vulnerability response is now seeking to prevent those from being exploited. Vulnerabilities are not necessarily incidents, and they're not necessarily breaches, because there's not necessarily always an activity against it. A great example of that is the print nightmare vulnerability of early 2020. Print nightmare was a case specific to Microsoft, and it was a case where there was a weakness, an improper configuration or code base in the Windows print spooler environment that allowed somebody to inject code and take control and command of your environment or your Windows devices. When it was published, there was no known active attack against that vulnerability. So it was not a security incident. So if we can identify that, we can patch that very quickly. We can prevent the incident from even being taking place, or the risk of it being scanned for and tried against in our environment. That's vulnerability. How do we deal with vulnerabilities? Because vulnerabilities are the proactive preventative steps. The very, very first thing, and I cannot stress this enough, is vulnerabilities are against or on assets. Because vulnerabilities are on or against assets, we have to know about assets. And yes, for all those configuration people in the world, I am saying the term asset. We can have an asset that is not directly connected to our environment, that we are not 100% in control of, and therefore it is not a configuration item directly in our environment. We've seen that case in many times in the security and vulnerability world, where supply chain management, we bought a server, we set it on the shelf because we're going to implement it in the last half of the year. If we don't maintain visibility of that asset, not yet deployed, in our warehouse, and we don't realize that the moment we turn it on, we're 6 months out of date on firmware, and somebody doesn't go through a firmware update process before they connect it to a network, we've introduced an active vulnerability in our environment. So, asset. There is a method and mode technically in deploying this for relating asset to configuration item. But ultimately, we scan for asset and build inventory through asset management and discovery or other CMDB population tools. Once we have that CMDB built, or at least in a mode and method of known and somewhat stacked together, we are now taking a tool set that will now scan our environment, Qualys Rapid7, a vulnerability scanner, and allowing it to do just that. Much like discovery with ServiceNow scans our environment and tells us something about the device that is out there, those other tools scan the environment and tell us even more about the device that is out there. So we're now going to build a library of the weaknesses we know of. When I say print nightmare, when I say log4shell or log4j, when I say Java memory buffer overrun, Adobe PDF, the Adobe PDF protocol started to have some there for a while, right? All of these are the definitional vulnerability. And we're going to build that library so we know what it is, how severe it is. Then we're going to build the resulting, is it in our environment? And we're going to build a response process for fixing that. As we can see, we're relying on very top step, CMDB, 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 discovery information about our devices. It's important to have that when we talk vulnerability. It's important somewhat in security incident as well, but it's important to have that when we talk about vulnerability, especially because we rely on that to do several things. Risk rating. We rely on that to tell us who owns the device, or at least we try to. We know in the configuration world that can be a challenge for organizations. But if we can get ownership and a picture of the device the vulnerability is on that much more quickly, we can automate the assignment and tasking of fixing these. So once we've built all of that and we start to actually fix our stuff, we do have scenarios where log4shell, print nightmare, then became exploitable. And in our environment, somebody was able to exploit that or try. So now we have the ability to move that over into the security incident world, or we have the ability to move that into fixing via our change management process. And we can see very quickly just between security incident and vulnerability, leveraging the ServiceNow stack, CMDB, change, asset information, ownership information. We can see efficiency already right there. So if we go back and we remember in our product stack, what ServiceNow SecOps is, we've talked about security incident vulnerability, but now we're going to talk about a couple of augmenting pieces. Threat intelligence is a piece of the platform that augments security incident, and it can also help us in the vulnerability world. Threat intelligence feeds, threat intelligence tools out there will populate known honeypots, known bad actors, things like the virus total tool or the classic have I been pwned. I can go out to have I been pwned and put my email address in there and see that my personal email address has been a part of many large-scale data breaches. So I probably need to be aware of that. That is threat intelligence in a very simplistic level. There are integrations and tool sets that will allow us to bring those types of data feeds in and correlate that with the data that's on a security incident or vulnerability. And now when our analysts are taking a look at this and resolving it, much like we think about in the standard ITSM incident world, the first thing that we're looking at is what is the device? What's going on with it? What do I need to do about it? So we are providing some enriching data. What is the device? What do I do about it? What's being done to it? Is it a bad thing? Is this malware? Is this malicious? Is this exploitable? We can do that in a somewhat automated fashion to allow very quick response instead of asking our security analysts to go back to one of those slides and checking 8 different tools. So we're going to take all of that and we're going to feed that into our security incident and allow us to see that quicker. And then the last piece that I do want to talk about is a very new. It's been part of the module for a while, but very new in interest is our configuration compliance module. Configuration compliance module, several of our security tools, especially when we talk vulnerability tools, Qualys, Rapid7, Tenable, are starting to introduce this concept of being able to gold standard scan. We're going to build a policy that's within that tool, not ServiceNow yet, that says, when we connect and we identify that this is a Windows desktop as opposed to server operating system, we have a set of standard configuration points that we need to ensure are on this device to help keep them safe and secure. Must have antivirus, must have endpoint detection tool, must have most recent patch, right? So those are policies we define within the scanning tool set to tell us that this device is or is not compliant with our security and safety image standard. We're going to return those much like we return the results of a security or vulnerability scan. And we're going to correlate and be able to do some actions on it. This is a unique piece because it very easily bridges between the security operations world, because our security tools are what know about, have the signature of, and know the compliance factor, and the IRM world or GRC world, where all of those things that I just mentioned, must have antivirus, must have endpoint detection, must be up to date, are also part of a control program that are in our policy and compliance module as well. So we'll see a very quick idea here that this allows us to bridge the gap now to not only are we measuring our security posture, but now we can start to relate this to and measure this within our risk and compliance framework as well. All right, head spinning, lot to take in. There's a lot of complexity and a lot of puzzle pieces and a lot of things that we can do at a very high level with SecOps within ServiceNow. And remember, all of this is really sought out as part of that SOAR, orchestrate, automate, and respond program. So all of this, each of these puzzle pieces really drive down to this slide. We drive to simplify, we drive to automate, orchestrate, and we drive to respond faster. Each of these pieces, security incident, vulnerability response, configuration compliance, in and of themselves are very complex. If we go back and look at each one of those slides, a lot of parts, a lot of things to consider. Well, we can really put it down into this flow and simplify it with how do we get the customer to this? How do we get them to utilizing this and benefiting from it? Service awareness, step one, being aware of what's in your environment. Having that cataloged, so to speak, in your asset and configuration world in ServiceNow. Integrating with all of those tools. Many of these have plugins already, either built by ServiceNow or built by vendor. Some of them may not, but the great thing is the power of the platform, very cliche term, but we have so many different ways that we can bring that data in a standardized fashion, whether that's through direct REST integration, whether that's through data feeds, inbound email, all the above. We have a way to bring that data in. So now we're going to take all of that data and we're going to correlate and prioritize that through again, both each of these tools and the platform already. Within configuration management or CMDB, we can already provide the idea of this is a riskier asset because it's external. This is a less risky asset because it's internal and has controls around it. Certain IP segments, certain locations, right? Very configuration driven, very asset and inventory driven there. But then we can also take the data that we're bringing in from all of these security tools. Log4j caught attention. It was a very easily exploited and very quickly exploited vulnerability. So it was a very severe vulnerability. However, in the security world, there was one very easy fix to that. Any of your devices that had no internet exposure or external exposure had a much, much, much lower risk. So Log4j, very widespread. The logging library that was vulnerable was used in a lot of products and platforms. So industry as a whole started screaming and going, we've got a lot to fix. Using this method, this asset is inside, this asset is siloed within a certain security environment. I don't need to fix that yet because I've got worse things to fix. So we know about the asset device CI. We know about the severity of the security world. We take all of that, we prioritize it, and we provide some additional data on what is the rest of the world seeing? Is this really that bad? And then we allow a response plan. And if you remember, in the AT&T and Palomon report for 21, 80% reduction in breach cost. And then underneath that, a huge reduction in breach risk by having a response plan. So just like we can do in much of the other response and task-driven, state-driven processes within ServiceNow, like incident and change, we build out a state process. We build out a response plan, and we govern the tool set to force that plan to take place. And we can also start to bring in automation and orchestration. We can, now that we know what the tool is, now that we have a higher confidence level of what the risk is, and we have a higher confidence level of who owns it, who fixes it, what the device is that needs fixed, we can now put some confidence behind automating that deployment of fix. This can be something as easy as turn off a firewall rule, turn off access to public side of the world, right? So we can orchestrate, we can integrate with your Palo Alto firewalls, your Cisco stacks, and say, adjust this security rule or put a security rule in, whitelist, blacklists, etc. But you'll notice that that's step 6, not step 2 or 3. The complexities within your customer base is they're going to hear that buzzword of AI, automate, orchestrate, and they're going to want that early, right? We can't. And we don't want to, because if they don't have a confidence in their data, if they don't have a confidence in informing and governing their response, they're probably improperly fixing. And by improperly automating the fix, they may be introducing worse things. If I blacklist an IP address in the wrong place, I might actually shut down my business. And then, as with everything, if we can't see what we're doing and we can't see how we're doing, none of this helps the business see value. And so we provide operational health, security posture reports, dashboards, performance analytics in that as well. All right. So this is where it all drives to. This is the ServiceNow plan for security operations. Providing visibility, integrating with the tool, correlating and orchestrating all of that noise, getting down to a single driven record of action across any of these types of events, incidents, or vulnerabilities, and governing the response of that. Thank you for watching my fun PowerPoint slideware. Not a lot of real exciting stuff, but you've now been introduced to the world of security operations in ServiceNow and the ideas and pain points of why we look to utilize this tool set to help improve our customers' lives and help make it a problem across the board. So with that, in the remaining time we have, the first thing I'll say before I open up the floor to questions is it gets more exciting from here. Our next 3 sessions will dive into seeing how to bring in that data, how to correlate and cut down all of our noise, because it's a lot. A little sneak peek just in 50 assets or devices within my home lab environment, scanning just those 50. I return and not authenticated scan, right? So think about that. That's the real world. Nobody knows my user or password or way to connect. I scanned without providing credentials, and I returned just under 300 vulnerabilities at home. I believe 2 or 3 of those were critical and exploitable. So we're going to take a look at that data. We're going to take a look at all of that noise. 50 assets, 300 vulnerabilities. Let's explode that to a large enterprise that has 20,000 servers. And let's walk through the life cycle of a security incident, a vulnerability, and how we can resolve those things very quickly. And we're actually going to resolve one in my environment. So it gets more fun and much more interactive in the days to come. So appreciate it. Appreciate everybody hanging in there and listening to this. Any questions on what we've seen and what we've talked about to date?
Hey, Aric, that was wonderful. I got a question about trusted security circles. Like, how is that really used? I'm still kind of unclear on it. The only thing I've heard from ServiceNow is that not many people participate in it, and that's all I know.
And that's very true. We're actually working with a customer right now that has that's debating whether they would benefit. So what trusted security circles really is, and you'll see that in the security incident slide here, right beside threat intel. The intent, whether or not done well, is a different story, but the intent is industry segment. So what ServiceNow did is they took a lot of threat intelligence, a lot of anonymized correlation of data of incident scene, categorization of incident, type of threat, all that stuff, right? Bad actor, is it ransomware, malware, blah, blah, blah. And they allow a customer to subscribe. It can be bidirectional or it can be one direction. Subscribe to a trusted security circles infrastructure that ServiceNow has. ServiceNow controls and maintains the parent or primary database of this within an instance stack. They declare industry segment, right? Healthcare, transportation, FinOps, so on. By declaring industry segment, then the data that goes in from, if they subscribe to this and allow their data to go, right? And there's some technical rule set around what that data is, but to be published up, it's only published and only accessible within that industry segment, and vice versa. If a customer subscribes to it as a way of pull data in, we are only subscribing to a segment of industry. Now, ServiceNow allows a little bit of a wider, if I'm transportation, I might have a FinOps leg, so a leg within the industry. So I might want both. Publishing versus pulling is a little different. But what am I getting out of that? What I'm getting is much more data set, right? If we think about what AI, predictive intelligence type of stuff within ServiceNow is, that's what we're getting. We're getting data sample set. We're getting generalized how many security incidents did healthcare within the trusted security platform see of type ransomware. Of those types, how many were exploitable? So some of that type of statistical, and what that lets an organization do if they subscribe to it is hone in on what to respond to, right? I can do a little bit of like a preemptive threat hunt to say, in the next 3 months, we're probably going to see an increase in X type of attack. The reason why, in that case, it's not as widely used inside of ServiceNow is a lot of threat intelligence tools are already doing it. You have things like Splunk Threat was the one the other day I heard. Even VirusTotal, I think, as a tool set is doing a lot of like industry tagging, right? MITRE as a framework, which we probably won't touch on through these Share the Wealths because it's its own beast, has industry segment built into it as well. So what is it? It's a data conglomerate, right? That lets us see some statistics and some predictive intelligencing type of stuff within kind of the threat stack, the threat intelligence, threat hunt, threat awareness stack. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody's time today. Hopefully we find some good value in understanding where customers are going to come from with their needs for security operations and the security operations suite. And as I mentioned, I promise we're going to start diving in and really start to see some of this data and see what it looks like in platform. Thank you, everybody.